Hello, everyone. Welcome to Watching Silent Films podcast, where we'll pick a silent film or a series of silent films, watch it, and discuss it. Here with me, recording is my co-hosts Bob and Lily. Hey, Bob.
Hello.
Hey, Lily.
Hey, how was going?
Greetings and salutations. So, today, we're actually going to go back to J.J. Dubrow. I can never pronounce his last name, but there's a link on zatfanman.com where it lists out top 10 films within 10 years, and we're gonna do part one. We had done part two initially. That was our first episode, and then the Dawn of Cinema, and then this previous episode we just did was for part one, where we kind of went back even further. Before the dawn of narrative film. I intend to kind of separate that in some sense, because the initial 1888 through, I don't know, 1907 or something like that, some of those were primarily experimental features. There wasn't a lot of narrative outright around that time period. Very, very baby steps towards narrative. So now we're doing kind of part three, and that should wrap up everything. But we're going to split up part three in multiple sort of podcasts, because some of the movies inside of part three are so not just long, but they're so densely packed that they ought to have sort of their own podcast devoted to itself. Some of these were still experimental, still kind of what the term was called actualities, but it was slowly kind of venturing into narrative film. And so there's a lot more narrative film, and I think to do it justice, we try to place it into the context of where it fits into its historic time. So therefore, we're going to do that for this particular. We're on part three now, which is 1908 through 1917, I think, something like that. We're going to split that up, at least two or three, and then go from there. And before I get started, if you just for the listeners, if you guys wouldn't mind leaving some feedback on our Apple Podcasts, star rating's fine, but reviews are the best. And also, you can find most of our podcasts on watchingsilentfilms.wordpress.com. Again, that's watchingsilentfilms, plural, .wordpress.com. And you can also email us, same thing, watchingsilentfilms, plural, @gmail.com, if you have any thoughts, comments, and questions. And we're going to keep going with Lily and Bob. If you guys had any chance to watch anything classic, by classic, I mean before Star Wars, typically.
Not classic. I did see this newer film called Midsummer, and oh my god, I have so many problems with it. I don't even want to begin talking about it.
Did you watch the director's cut?
Oh my god, I must have with my friends, because it was 2.5 hours long.
Well, it's a 3-hour cut, so that's the director's cut.
Oh my god.
Yeah, it's got even more gore or something. But anyway, that's aside now.
No, I don't even want to think about it. Worst.
It's funny because that actually connects with some of the silent films that we did in the past, like Hexen.
Yeah.
And it's going to connect with Dante Inferno. We're going to talk about it. So,
wow. Even
though it's like a brand new movie, the more you watch like modern movies, the more I think more often than not, some of those people are ignorant as they're making these movies of the cinematic history. Some of them aren't. I don't really know, because I'm just making an assumption here. So maybe I'm just being biased. But sometimes these filmmakers make these movies, and they're kind of almost unaware that they're tripping over the historic legacy of silent films. But anyways. I'll give you another example. Is a recent movie in the last 2 or 3 years called A Ghost Story. And it was shot using like 1.3 aspect ratio, which is like a square, what's called the Academy ratio, which is like that's how the film started. It was more of a square ratio, and but also used a lot of like rounded, faded not faded, but the lens style was more rounded too, just like a lens iris. And they used to do that, of course, a lot in silent films. So, again, I don't know if that. I don't even know who. I don't remember who the director is, but if they are actually intentionally doing that and kind of paying homage to older movies, or just like totally ignorant and just like, it's kind of fun. I don't know. So that, again, that's probably my own bias. I'll admit it up front. And you, Bob?
Oh, well, I'm curious, Laylee, did you see that film because it relates, or was that coincidence?
That was pure coincidence. One of my friends is a teacher, so she was going back to school this week. So, we also wanted to spend time together. And my friend had seen the trailer, so we thought it was going to be a great thriller, which I'm really into thrillers.
You wanted to spend quality time together.
Yes, and that quality time drove me nuts because of this movie. So I guess in a good way, I can complain about it as we talk about silent films. But
have you seen Hereditary, which is also the director's other feature related to that?
Nope.
Yeah, it's very similar themes. But anyways.
Oh.
If you're into that, it's kind of it's a lot more horror than thriller, that movie. Yeah.
But is it good? That's the main thing.
That's always up for debate. So, modern movies.
I haven't seen anything since the last podcast, as far as
That's okay.
Anything older.
Yeah. Cool beans. I just sometimes I bring that up because sometimes those newer than silent film era have a lot of connections to the history of silent films, and it's always interesting to kind of tap into that realm. All right, with that in mind, let's get moving here into the series of shorts. So let's take a look at here. 1908. So this particular short, and almost all these are about 8 to 10 minutes, I would say. Most of these quote-unquote films are really short because they're just coming out of the experimental era. Some of the shorts that we watched last time on the last podcast, they were like literally seconds, some of them. So even though the word is film or films, it's just like very short, right? And it's no different. Here, some of them are just 5 to 10 minutes at most, and they may or may not tell a story, but more often than that, they're almost kind of categorized under documentaries, I would say. But that's the best term that we can use. The reality is, I actually kind of think of them more as like TV footage. Like nowadays, we watch the news, right? We'll watch like somebody sending a news crew to, for example, like, as we're recording 2020 now, the coronavirus is going crazy. So they'll send a news crew to like somewhere in the Far East. Oh, coronavirus is going crazy here, and right? And the camera will like film clips from wherever they are, right? So if you watch the news, like they might send somebody to that, I forgot the province,
Wuhan, I think.
Yeah, whatever that's called, in China. So they'll film like how desolate the city or town is because everybody's on lockdown. I think that's kind of the feeling I get by watching these, especially the first two, the 1908 one and the 1909. Now, just to give a real quick description of what they are, the 1908 short is released by British Pathé, which is like a organization that releases newsreels, and usually if you're an audience member in that era of time, 1900s, you're watching movies in the theater, they usually show some of these news clips, like TV, like CNN or something, as a news clip of here's what's going on. And so one of the clips circling around was this Wilbur Wright brothers. They're doing a flight test demo in France, and so the description says, while not a film in the traditional sense, this newsreel shows possibly the first film clips of a Wright airplane. While they made their first flight in 1903, it wasn't until 1908 that their invention was legitimized. Pathé showed these short news clips in theaters preceding the features that was shown around that time. The Wright brothers demoed their flight capability in 1903. Of course, if you guys, I think just pretty common, right? In early education, in history, we've been told that Wright brothers succeeded in demoing this when they demoed the technology for flight in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, and it's as a result of their experiences working in printing presses, bicycles, motors, and other machinery work. Their combined skills, years and years in all those sort of manufacturing processes, experiences, culminated in their interest in flight too, in aviation, and so all of that skill combined allowed them to make this technological breakthrough. But again, so this is just a clip of it.
This clip was made in France, right?
1908, yep.
Outside Paris?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah.
Somewhere around there. I don't really know for sure. I didn't really dig into deep on this one. But it was just an interesting sort of like a news clip, showing how they took off and they flew around. And the other thing interesting I read in the research is that the military was trying to, which is not a surprise, U.S. military tried to, and they're American citizens, right? They're from Ohio, and that's where they gain all their experiences. So the U.S. military was actually trying to integrate these technologies into the branch of whichever branch was interested in doing that, and they ran a lot of test flights.
Could have been the Air Force.
Well,
there was no Air Force
right,
at the
that's
time.
what I mean, right? So long story short, they tried to do this. Like they ran about 11 or 20 something test flights, and like 50% ended up in somebody getting killed because the engine was in front, and so when it nosedived, the engine would then like crush the human behind the engine. So it was like they haven't quite figured this out yet. So they didn't ended up succeeding. That was really the only blip I think I read specifically around this. But other than that, any other comments about this short?
I loved it.
Yeah.
I thought it was really well. I thought the detail was fantastic. It was great quality.
Yeah. I mean, if you have, at that point, 35 millimeter, and if that original footage has been retained or maintained or restored, it wouldn't be surprising that nitrate is still showing some, and it's all shot outdoors, of course. So.
Yeah, it was very good quality. And I thought it would be very good to show it in classrooms, for showing, even elementary school students.
It's a good history lesson, yeah.
Yeah.
Any
other thoughts before we move on?
I guess that, I mentioned this before we started recording. I got my dad to watch it with me, and he was, very fascinated by it.
Yeah.
So it really can capture just, interest at any age.
Exactly.
Because one reason, too, that he was watching it, my grandfather was an air pilot in World War II. So my dad knows a whole bunch about planes from him. And then I don't know as much just because I'm the granddaughter. So I think that's another reason why he wanted to watch it with me. Because, it's only 30 years later that we're having all these amazing planes in the Second World War. And then whenever they started coming around in the late teens, maybe.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there was, like any invention, once you have a technology demo, multiple people, series of people would continue to refine it and evolve it until it, it's like good working status. And plus, like somebody like Henry Ford, he refined the manufacturing process. So using his process of manufacturing motor for a automotive vehicle, you probably take the same concept process-wise to build airplane engines as well as airplanes and everything. So I'm sure there's a lot of failures, like the thing I was telling you about, not just the military but private companies to doing test pilots, and probably a lot of deaths. But with the failures comes success, right? Like there's so many of our inventions today came from a lot of failures, came from as a result of quote unquote luck or just experiments gone awry. You know, it wasn't the original intention, but it came that way. You know.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyways, so yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the most significant thing, of course, is human flight, right? That before this, the closest thing that at least I can think of historically is that Leonardo da Vinci drawings about what do you call that? Like the wingspan. He was trying to emulate a bat, and he drew.
They're like Icarus.
Yeah, or something. He was trying to make something where humans could
An exoskeleton.
Yeah, take flight or something like that. It was always a desire in a lot of people, and just having an historic moment be captured on film, I think is the significance of this film for 1908 is the reason why. Because just human flight, right? It's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
All right, any other thoughts before we move on?
Oh, all set on that one.
Yeah, I'm good.
1909, Moscow clad in snow. It's shot by one Willer in Russia, and the documentary shows Moscow at that point, contemporary life from the Kremlin and Marshall's Bridge, the Mushroom and Fish Market, Petrovsky Park, and I don't know if you guys got a chance to check out the review from moviesilently.com. Shout out to Fritz. She's an excellent proprietor of the Movie Silently website and also podcast as well. So, well-researched review, and also, you know, an amazing slice of life. I don't know if you guys read her article, but essentially it's about this particular 1909 was pre-revolution. We discussed it very briefly during our podcast for Battleship Potemkin about Russian history. And so if you can remember that far, I had to refresh my mind because I forgot a lot. In another decade or around that time, there would be a lot of revolutions in Russia where essentially the way of life at this point in time was held together by monarchs, or what they call tsars, Tsar Empire. And it's a very kind of traditional lifestyle until sort of the countrymen took hold of them and got rid of them, and essentially, revolution, after post-revolution, all of that entire lifestyle was completely gone. And so the significance of the footage that was shot here for 1909 is that all of those buildings may or may not exist after the revolution, but also just that it was capturing a more it's like time traveling. You know, you capture a point in time very specifically, pre-revolution, pre-upheaval, things happening in history. So that's the significance of this particular documentary, where actuality, and again, it's very much like a news clip, you know, into a time that's been lost, right?
Exactly.
So,
and that's the thing that struck me about it, was that all these people were going about their business, and people would go down the road with sleighs, pulled by horses, and I thought that was absolutely wonderful. I actually felt like if I was there, I'd be enjoying it immensely. And the funny thing is, you know, you wouldn't really, unless you knew it was Russia, Moscow, I don't think there's very many clues to realize that it wouldn't be an American town of the same period. Except obviously the snow and all the sleighs, but even then, some U.S. towns would have that. But people going about their business, you know, shopping, and running through the square between carriages and all. I thought that was really nice.
I thought the clothes they wear, I thought was pretty cool. Like the people on, is it skis or something? They're just probably going from one shopping or something, or just doing their normal life, but they're like dressed in kind of, you know, Victorian type, you know, style clothing still from, you know, the turn of the century.
You'd have to have some detailed knowledge of fashion to know that, though.
Exactly, that's what I mean. But
yeah.
The fact that it captured a transition in life.
Yeah.
Of where people are modernizing one way or another. I thought that was pretty cool. So, any other thoughts about this one?
For me, it was. I know it's like it's the slice of life. I think because there wasn't really any sound to go with it. I don't know. There was, but there wasn't. It was just kind of boring to me. But I did like the fact that all these people were looking at the camera because they don't know what's going on. So that's cute.
Yeah, I mean it's very similar to kind of a lot of news stories today. Still, when you send a news crew somewhere, somebody's going to stare into the camera.
Oh yeah.
It's just sometimes...
Well, I don't think people around that time saw very many of them either.
Exactly, it is very new, and they had no clue. Some people didn't care, and that's pretty cool. Lots of mushrooms. It's like a whole string of mushrooms. Anyway, in the movie Silently, Review talks about how like Russians love mushrooms.
Huh.
And there's a whole camaraderie, no pun intended, about just surrounding just mushroom finding.
Camaraderie.
Yeah, there is. Like if you are enemies, go find a mushroom together and you'll be comrades afterwards or something like that. I don't know. So, it's very interesting. Culturally. I didn't know how true that is. But anyways. All right, so if you guys don't have any thoughts, let's keep moving on. Next we find 1910's White Fawn's Devotion, which is directed by Young Deer in America. And I'll just read a quick description of the story itself. When a white settler discovers he has inherited a fortune, his Native American wife attempts to kill herself, expecting that he'll abandon her. Believing him to be a murderer, nearby Indians chase the settler before his wife is revived and everything is reconciled. Contrary to later Hollywood films, Native Americans were acting, writing, and directing during this time, as did James Young Deere in this one, whose ancestry was of Nanticoke people of Delaware. So what do you think of this one, guys? This one's more of a narrative, by the way. So it's not an actuality. It was a constructed
It was definitely good to learn about that part of the history of what Native Americans were doing at the time. They're, writing, directing, acting. And, they weren't completely out of the loop. Like, I don't know, our country and culture likes to imagine they're just not around anymore. No, they're still there. But, we've talked about this before in other podcasts about how there's one misconception and then the whole story goes insane because the daughter's like, oh, my father murdered my mom. So then they're going to go kill him. It's just like, oh no.
Yeah, and so I don't think the description did it justice, but essentially this family of the white husband, the Native American wife had a daughter, and the daughter happened upon after the mother tried to kill herself, but the dad had the knife in his hand, and so she thought that her father tried to kill her mother, and so she then went to the chiefs, and then they rallied together and try to get this guy, and so that's kind of the principal story.
I kind of found it a bit hokey.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it was still developing, of course. They were still learning how to do these things, but I found it really funny that some of the Indians, well, obviously a good several of the main characters were actually white people, white actors.
Right.
The tribe, when you see the tribe, that's Native Americans. But some of the Native Americans, the one that was chasing him and traced him to a cliff where he went over the cliff to hide hanging on a rope. The one who was chasing him and cut the rope was really dressed in overalls, like long underwear.
Right.
So his skin was dark, and I thought that wasn't a great way to do it.
I was wondering about that because I noticed
Yeah.
the costume. I was like, why is he wearing that?
Right. It wasn't well hidden that he was wearing like long underwear. So
It was shot in New Jersey, so it wasn't like, in the West, in the American West,
yeah.
So.
It was one of the things that I thought it was a little. I had a hard time figuring out if I was supposed to be laughing because it seemed kind of comical, and I had a feeling they were trying to be serious, but I was still feeling like it was a little comical.
Yeah. So some of the things we have to take into the context of the times. I often stress a lot with older films, especially narrative ones, as they're trying to construct a piece of entertainment, is to figure out what the context around the film was or is, and what the target audience is. And so you got to remember, around this time, this is now 1910, so it's probably a good 10 years until the film exhibition has been around. Like they're charging
Right.
people money to come and watch something. And so when they're watching something, sometimes there would be like a newsreel, but more often than not, it's a piece of entertainment. And so again, this, like many other entertainment of its time, can be what's called melodramatic, and they themselves would call themselves that.
Mm-hmm.
And the acting often is an extension of stage. So if you
Right.
know anything about theater or stage, you have to project to the back of the audience.
Yeah, it did feel very theatery.
Right, and so and a lot of people came from that tradition, and so when these actors and actresses were doing scenes, they did it. Some of them did it the way they know how, which is theater, and so they don't really understand that film is more subtle. That's not to say that there were other films too that did it more subtly, and sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And so this particular film was the one that they didn't do that. They're more theater / stage type acting itself, which can lead to some of that hokiness stuff. But honestly, it still happens today sometimes in modern films. So I don't know if you guys remember Cats.
Oh god, I'm not seeing that.
But anyways, it's recording 2020. So long story short, we can laugh at the stuff back then, but it still occurs today. So that's just always remember these films.
I understand that context.
Exactly.
I mean, I've seen enough silent films, but and I'm critiquing it. I try to critique the film by the times.
Exactly.
And I mean, it's obviously a very dramatic moment when the Indian comes over and cuts the rope.
Right.
But
yeah, I don't think this is like an amazing movie, but I think it was representative of something significant. It's got usually a historic significance, and so this particular significance is the fact that you have this Native Americans. They're doing things that we didn't think that they were doing at that time, and I think that's the reason why this particular one was picked for 1910.
yeah,
right?
I also felt like it had a very abrupt ending. And I noted it said, "You go."
Yeah, get out of here.
Like that was the end.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah. Yep, that's pretty much the ending. So I think that if you guys read further along some of the research, is that the significance of this is more that the director, James Young Deere, is of Native American heritage, and
Yep.
and he I think his wife, I'm not too sure.
Yeah, I gotta say that was impressive. I agree with Lily that historically it was really fantastic to see the tribe included in a film.
But it's also against type if you kind of think about it, because it wasn't so much like a white savior story that often occurs, or
Right.
at least we think of.
Yeah,
it's actually the
very
red
different.
savior, right? So the wife actually saves the
Right.
white man, and then at the end, the go part is that the interracial couple ends up together, like it's a happy ending,
Right.
essentially,
Right. That's
which
yeah,
is a rare
that's true.
occurrence even for that time or even now, right? So So there's some of those sort of significances. Is the reason why I think this ended up. What did it say here? 2008. The movie was added to the U.S. National Film Registry because of the cultural historic.
Mm-hmm.
Like we talked about, it's not like greatest thing since sliced bread or anything, but it's more just the cultural significance of what this represents, behind the scenes, because so many films have been lost, right?
Right.
So you can only pick the ones that have survived and say, "Yep, this is historically significant."
Yeah.
So
As a film with a story beginning and end from that time.
Exactly.
Mm.
Yeah. So this guy, James Young Deere, made more than 100 shorts and a few features, and again, most of them are lost, which is typical. Most silent films are gone. And this film, White Fawn's Devotion, is one of the fewer than 10 films of this guy's to have survived. So his wife, Lillian St. Cyr or something, that's her stage name is Princess Redwing, and she appeared on I didn't write this down, but something like the Squalid Man, which is Cecil B. DeMille's first silent film feature directed, 1914 or something. So she appeared as one of the characters in Cecil B. DeMille's directorial debut.
Wow.
That's her claim to fame, I guess, amongst others. She's done a lot of stage work. So, anyway, that's the significance of this particular film. Any other thoughts? This is a joint production. It's a Pathé is from France originally, a studio making films, and a lot of their films were more about westerns, and so they wanted to make westerns here in the U.S., but they couldn't realistically portray that in the Old West. So they ended up sending this guy, Young Deere, to Los Angeles to make Indian-themed films. So it's kind of funny.
Very interesting.
He eventually ran the company's West Coast operations in California, where he made a lot of that 150 silent films in that era of time. So it's pretty cool. And he also hired a lot of Native Americans as actors too, just later on. He tried to make movies without cliches that in time kind of come to known. But anyways, there's a lot more interesting histories beyond that. But any other parting thoughts? Or keep going?
You can keep going.
Yeah, can't think of anything to add.
All right, so let's take a break here, and we'll get to Dante's Inferno in a second. But for this particular podcast, we're gonna wrap up this week's podcast here, and then we'll kind of leave Dante's Inferno for next week, as it were. So, thank you, listeners, and thank you, Bob and Lily. And again, if you wouldn't mind leaving a star or review on Apple Podcasts or any of the podcasting platforms you can find us. You can find the rest of our podcasting work at Watching Silent Films, plural, watchingsilentfilms.wordpress.com, and you can email us at watchingsilentfilms@gmail.com. Thank you, Bob and Lily. Thank you, listeners, and we'll talk again next week. Bye-bye.
Good night.